Let's take you to Israel next, where an historic showdown is taking place. All 15 judges of the Supreme Court are convening for the first time ever to hear petitions against a legal amendment which limits the court's ability to scrutinise government decisions. This is a live shot of the court. You can see the judges there gathering and deliberating. On the eve of this pivotal court case, thousands of people took part in a protest in Jerusalem, saying that government reforms would erode human rights in Israel. Our correspondent, Yolan Nell, gave us the latest developments.
Well, after months of anti-government protests that brought hundreds of thousands of Israelis out on the street to protest the hardline government's big plans for a judicial overhaul, now really the stage is set for this big showdown, as you said. All 15 judges of the Supreme Court have now gathered in the court. It's the first time in Israeli history that they've all convened together, so this is something already unprecedented and historic, and they really have to decide in a ruling on their own future, on their own fate, their own powers. So this is just an extremely difficult moment that could lead to a constitutional crisis in Israel. Back in July, you had this situation where the government pushed through changes, a legal amendment that stopped the court from being able to use a legal standard of reasonableness to strike down government legislation, to overturn government decisions. Now, that caused an outcry, with many Israelis saying that this weakened the independence of the courts, it stopped oversight of the government and weakened democracy ultimately in the country. But then you have the supporters of the government who've also been out in force on the streets, who say that actually the court has become too interventionist. It too easily has been able to overturn decisions by an elected government. And so now really all eyes are on the court during this hearing to see what happens. It's expected to be a very long day in the court, and it won't actually make its final ruling for weeks or maybe months to come.
Considering, like you say, the court is ruling on its own future fate and powers, is there any indication, I appreciate we will take some time to find out the result, but is there any indication as to which way the Supreme Court judges might go?
Of course, there's just lots of speculation on it. So on the one hand, if it decides that it allows this law to pass, and lots of people are saying that it affects what's known as a basic law, that's kind of quasi-constitutional status in Israel. And in the past, the Supreme Court has never interfered in this way with a basic law, overruling it. So that would be one option. Of course, that would disappoint the anti-government protesters hugely if the court decided to let this law pass. It could decide perhaps on a technicality, say that the government rushed this through and that the law should therefore be reconsidered for that reason. Some people think that that is a fudge that could be made. Or, of course, the government could decide to strike down the law that was passed back in July. Now, if that happens, members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government have said that they wouldn't abide by the decision. And so that would lead to a kind of constitutional crisis in the country, a big disagreement over who has the supreme authority. Is it the court or is it the government?
That was the BBC's Yolan Nell. Let's show you some more pictures of the Supreme Court. We can see debates there, the Supreme Court justices, all 15 of them convening for the very first time in the country's history to debate this, which would in fact weaken judicial independence and democracy, according to critics. The government obviously says otherwise. We've seen months of protests throughout Israel. There are significant numbers, though, that do support these planned reforms. It's expected that it will take weeks, if not months, for the Supreme Court, as Yolan was just saying, to make their decisions. You can read more, including some insight and analysis from Yolan Nell, on our website. Just head to bbc.com/news.